As you've just heard, Jesus tells what appears to be a simple little story about a Pharisee and a tax collector going up to the temple to pray. The parable seems to be straightforward, with no mystery at all in its meaning, as if it's just black and white. And Luke tries to make it even more obvious with this introduction. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. In the parable, Jesus is giving us two very extreme examples that illustrate how we might see ourselves in relation to others and to God. A Pharisee who is absolutely full of himself, and a tax collector with way too much humility. It's like he sees himself as the worst example of humanity. Well, right there, a simple story got more interesting, didn't it? Because that's part of a twist. We may not feel it, but Jesus is turning their world upside down. They respected the Pharisees, and they did not respect the tax collectors in that time. I don't know that we do in our time either, but that was really bad back then. But the Pharisees were dedicated to their faith. Tax collectors were dedicated to supporting an unjust political system and making money for themselves in the process. The Pharisee is supposed to be the one who goes home justified, not the tax collector. Well, it is just like Jesus, as you know, to upend our assumptions. Like, for instance, the evil Samaritan who turns out to be the hero in the Good Samaritan, or the selfish upstart prodigal who was given a fancy party for all of the trouble he brought on his family, or the 99 sheep who are literally abandoned to go search for the one sheep. And here in this story, the one who is ultimately justified was from one of the most hated professions of their day. Jesus likes messing with our assumptions. He likes rattling our cages and making us rethink our attitudes. It's as if he is trying to push us off balance. And on top of that, he makes these two characters so over the top in his description of the way they prayed at the temple. And honestly, I don't think Jesus really thinks that anyone fits either extreme. After all, the Pharisees acting like no other Pharisee that ever lived. I'm the greatest. I'm the best. Maybe there was a boxer once upon a time who kind of had that attitude. I do more good than anyone else. I don't make mistakes ever. While I am nearly perfect in every way. Oops, I just made a mistake. I meant to say that I'm absolutely perfect in every way. Now, we have probably known people who tend to hover at that end of the spectrum. People who sometimes look down their noses at those they think are beneath them. Now think about that phrase. Just thinking that there are people beneath them is most of the problem. For such people, it's as if there's a hierarchy of humanity. And in their minds, some folks just naturally were going to be on the top. And here's the shocker. The folks they think are at the top are people who are just like them. People who look like them and act like them. Isn't that the root problem of racism and prejudice? People seem to have this inherent need to be better than someone. When you have an attitude of superiority, you end up having to overlook a great many of your own faults. Things that prove that you are not so perfect after all. There is a significant amount of delusion that goes into seeing yourself as above everyone else. Now, on the other hand, the tax collector comes before God begging for mercy. He sees himself at the bottom of the hierarchy. No one is lower than him. He has no worth, no redeeming social value. He sees himself as so unworthy that he doesn't even come close to the temple. It says he was standing far off. He didn't even think he had the right to approach God. So way back there at the far end of the fellowship hall, this fella is literally beating himself up and crying, "God, be merciful on me, a sinner." It reminds me of that phrase from the song Amazing Grace. Grace that saved a wretch like me. Now, I've done some stupid things in my time, but I am not a wretch, which is defined as an unfortunate, unhappy, despicable, contemptible person. Well, 2 out of 4 isn't bad, right? I'm not perfect, but I'm not a wretch either, and neither are you. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere between these two extremes. One person came before God declaring his great worth and also declaring the unworthiness of others, and the other came declaring his own unworthiness. And then Jesus says it was the tax collector that went home justified. I have to think that one through. I suppose he went home justified because he was the only one of those two that was open to God's grace and mercy. But think about this. Jesus didn't go around telling people to put themselves down. On the contrary, he absolutely lifted people up from the low positions the world had put them in and let them know that indeed they were wonderful and they had worth and dignity. I got to thinking about this parable this week, and I think that Jesus uses, and this isn't the only time, he uses such extreme examples to teach us to find a middle way, a balanced approach. Not too high, but not too low. The fact is that Jesus talks about finding a proper balance more often than you might imagine in the gospel. He ends up this particular teaching by saying that all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. If you think too much of yourself, you need to be humbled. If you think too little of yourself, you need to be exalted a bit. That makes sense, doesn't it? It brings a balance into our lives and into the world. How many people have lives out of balance in our society? Too much work, not enough free time. Too serious all the time, not enough joy. You've probably heard the story about the businessman who went down to Mexico on holiday. And as he was relaxing on the beach, he noticed a fisherman coming in on his boat. He went over and looked, and he complimented the fisherman on his catch and asked him how long it took for him to catch that many fish. "Well, not long," was the reply. "Then why didn't you stay out longer?" asked the tourist. "Because this is enough for me and my family," explained the fisherman. "So what do you do with the rest of your time?" "I sleep late. I fish for a while. I play with my children. I take a siesta. I spend time with my wife, and then in the evening I go into the village to visit my friends. I have a few drinks. I play the guitar, and I sing a few songs. I have a full life." The businessman kind of looked at him quizzically and said, "I have an MBA from Harvard, and I can help you. You should spend more time on the water fishing, and then you can sell the extra fish, make more money, and then buy a bigger boat." The fisherman said, "And after that?" "Well, with the extra money from the bigger boat, you could buy 2 or 3 boats and eventually hire more people to operate a fleet of fishing trawlers. Instead of selling your fish to a middleman, you can start to negotiate directly with the processing plant. And after a while, you'd be able to open your own plant. And then you could leave this little village for Mexico City or eventually New York. And from there, you could operate your whole enterprise. Well, how long would that take? Asked the fisherman. 20, 25 years. And after that? Well, my friend, that's when the real fun starts. When the business gets really big, you can sell stock in the company and make millions. Wow, millions? What happens after that? Asked the fisherman. After that, you'll be able to retire on the coast, sleep in every day, do some fishing, play with your grandkids, take a siesta, and spend time with your wife. And in the evenings, you'll be able to go out drinking and singing with your friends. The fisherman just sort of shrugged his shoulders and walked away. Jesus talks about finding a balance. Finding a balance in other ways as well. Think about this. Probably the most famous balancing act is when he said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. I don't know about you, but did you ever have to balance equations in algebra? That was algebra, right? Yeah, a long time ago. Well, Jesus is showing us how to balance the equation of a happy, satisfied life. Your love for others, for friends, strangers, the good and the bad, is to be equal to the love that you have for yourself. I've asked you to do this before, but just imagine a world where such a balance was the norm. Something that was taught everywhere. Something that was practiced every day. Poverty ends. War and violence end. Social and financial inequity ends. So think about it. Jesus was a proponent for affirmative action a couple thousand years before it became a social program. And before Jesus, his cousin John the Baptist, we forget about this, but John the Baptist preached a similar equation. If you have got two coats, give one away. If you've got more than enough food, give some away. Even John the Baptist is telling us that there's a proper balance between excess and poverty. It's like the old farmer in church one Sunday listening to the sermon, and when the preacher said, if you've got $2,000, give one away, and he shouted, amen. If you've got more than enough food, give some away. Amen. If you've got 2 cars, give one away. Amen. If you've got 2 coats, give one away. The preacher asked where the amen was, and the farmer said, but I've got 2 coats. Jesus is trying to teach us to live a balanced life. It's never easy to find the perfect balance, so don't shoot for perfection. But for starters, don't be like the Pharisee in the parable. We've already got enough people who think too highly of themselves in the world already. But don't be like the tax collector either. You are not a wretch. So let's start simply. Think of others. Care for others. And when you find yourself in need, be open to the gifts offered to you by others. Therein lies balance. Therein lies grace. Amen.